What would you do if a rock fell on your head a kilometer underground, causing such severe injury that your brain swelled and your body became completely paralyzed? What's even worse is that the nearest exit is still a 10-hour climb through freezing narrow cave passages with steep cliffs. Because this is exactly what happened to a cave explorer in 2014, which led to an extraordinary and historic rescue mission considered one of the most expensive, most complicated, and deepest cave rescue operations in history. This is the thrilling true story behind the rescue of Johan Westhauser. Mr. Good Vibes, yeah. At noon on June 7, 2014, three men began to descend into a place that most people would never dare to enter. A dark and cold world beneath the Bavarian Alps in Germany called the Rescending Cave. A name that means the giant thing. The group included Johan Westhauser, a scientist and expert cave explorer. He is not a tourist and he is not a beginner either. In fact, he is one of the people who helped discover and map this very cave. But what he didn't know was that the place he knew so well would become the place where his life would almost end. As they slowly descended, each step took them farther and farther away from the normal world. Here, there is no sunlight, no cell phone signal, no GPS, and no quick way to call for help. This is not like an ordinary cave that you can just walk into and come out of after a few hours. Rescending Cave is a massive underground maze. There are holes that go almost straight down, underground cliffs, icy water flowing from the rocks, and passages so tight that sometimes you have to control your breathing just to fit your body through. While inside, the temperature is only about 1 to 3 degrees Celsius. It's extremely cold and the humidity is almost 100%, causing even the explorers' clothes and equipment to gradually get wet. But for Johan and his group, this is just a normal risk. They continued going down for several hours until they reached almost 1,000 meters or 1 kilometer beneath the mountain. This is even deeper than most of the tallest buildings in the world. Aside from the depth, at this point they were also more than 6 kilometers away from the entrance of the cave. And this is where the unexpected happened. Around 1:30 in the early morning of June 8th, while they were in total darkness, a rock suddenly moved. In just a few seconds, a chunk of rock fell from above and hit Johan directly on the head. The impact was so strong that even though he was wearing his protective helmet, he suffered a severe head injury. In an instant, one of the people who knew the way out best was now the one who couldn't walk or move. He couldn't just be carried up, he couldn't be pulled quickly. Because one wrong move could worsen the injury to his brain. And while he was lying in the darkest part of the mountain, that's when they realized the biggest problem. No one on the surface knew that an accident had happened, and if none of his companions could get out to ask for help, no one would come to save him. After the accident, Johan's two companions knew that with every minute that passed, his chances of getting out alive were getting smaller. But there was one big problem. At the depth where they were, there was no way to directly communicate with the people on the surface. They couldn't call a rescue team. They couldn't send a message. And no one else knew how bad things were inside. They had to make a decision. One would stay with Johan to watch over him, make sure he didn't get too cold and keep him safe until help arrived. But the other had to take on an almost impossible mission, climb out alone. Under normal conditions, getting out of Rescending Cave is already difficult even for a strong and uninjured explorer. But now he has to do it while carrying the weight of the situation, knowing that his friend's life depends on his every move. As he begins to climb, he knows he can't afford to make a mistake. For many hours, he went through the narrow passages again, climbed high rocks, and passed parts of the cave where he had to use a rope to get up. No matter how exhausted he was, he couldn't just stop, because as he climbs toward the light, Johan remains below. Injured, barely able to move, and with no certainty as to when help would arrive. Almost 10 hours passed before his companion finally reached the cave exit, and that's when the real rescue operation began. Emergency responders were immediately called, but when they found out where the victim was, that's when they realized how big the problem was. This wasn't a simple accident where a few rescuers could just go in and carry the patient out. The person they needed to save was under a mountain. They had to go through a complicated system of tunnels that even some professional rescuers had never experienced. They needed special equipment. They needed an expert in cave rescue, and most importantly, they needed time. On the very first night of the operation, several groups of rescuers entered the cave to try to reach Johan and his companion who were left behind. But the deeper they went, the clearer one thing became. The hardest part of the rescue was not reaching Johan. The real challenge was how they could get an injured man out from a place where even a healthy person would have a hard time getting out. Because of this, an international emergency call was made, and it didn't take long. Hundreds of rescuers from different countries started traveling to the mountain. As the news spread about an explorer trapped beneath the descending cave, it gradually became clear to the authorities that an ordinary rescue team would not be enough. Because the operation they needed to carry out was almost unprecedented, they didn't just need to send someone down below. They needed to build an entire rescue system inside the mountain itself. Some of the best cave rescuers arrived from Germany, Austria, Italy, Switzerland, Croatia, and other places. In total, more than 700 people became part of the operation. But even with that many helping, it didn't mean they could all go in at the same time. Because inside the cave, the number of people can also be a danger. In some parts, only one person can fit. Some passages are so dangerous that the next group has to wait before they can pass through. Even simply carrying equipment became a huge challenge. Something that's easy to carry on the surface becomes extremely difficult to bring in when it has to be pushed through narrow holes, lowered down cliffs, and moved across slippery rocks for many hours. At the height of the operation, only about 60 rescuers could be inside at the same time. That's why every move had to be planned. Who would go in, who would come out, who would bring supplies, and who would prepare the path for Johan's return. Their first mission was to reach Johan and find a way to establish communication with the outside. Because normal radio signals couldn't penetrate the thick rock of the mountain, the rescuers set up a special communication system inside the cave. They gradually laid out a line from the entrance to where Johan was, so that those inside could send information to the command center above. For the first time since the accident began, they had a clearer connection between the dark world below and the hundreds of people waiting above. At the same time, they set up temporary underground camps. These were not just simple tents. This would serve as the resting area, supply station, and medical checkpoint for the rescuers while they carried out the most difficult part of the operation. Because the trip to Johan and back took many hours, it was impossible for them to keep going in and out just to get supplies. Everything they needed, food, medicine, ropes, batteries, medical equipment, had to be brought down one by hand. Even the rescuers themselves had to be watched closely because of the cold, exhaustion, and the amount of time they spent underground. It was possible that they themselves could also be put in danger. That's why the operation was like a huge underground relay. There were people going down carrying equipment, some climbing back up to rest, while others were preparing the next part of the route. On the night of June 11, after several days of preparation, the doctor, Martin Goksu, reached Johan at the bottom of the cave. There they learned about his real condition. He had a head injury but he was alive, and most importantly, he had enough strength to try to get out. But they had one big problem. Because of the type of injury Johan had, they couldn't just pull him, turn him around, or let his head hit the rocks. Even the smallest mistake could worsen his condition while they were in the middle of the climb. He needed to stay protected throughout the entire journey. They made a special stretcher that could minimize the shaking while carrying him. But even with the stretcher, there was still no guarantee that it would work, because the path they would take back was not made for a person lying down. There were parts where the rescuers had to measure if the stretcher would fit before they could proceed, because if they got stuck in the wrong place while carrying Johan, it wouldn't just be him who would be in danger. Even the people trying to rescue him would be at risk. And after several days of preparation, the most dangerous part of the entire operation began: the actual ascent back to the surface with Johan. In normal rescues, finding the missing person doesn't mean the operation is almost over. But in this case, it's the opposite. Finding Johan was just the beginning of the most dangerous part. Because now they have to move a man with a head injury up to a place that's difficult to climb, even for the rescuers themselves. Before they moved him, each team had to make sure the path was ready. They set up new ropes, steel anchors, and safety points in parts of the cave where he needed to be pulled up. In other areas, they created an underground pulley system to slowly lift the stretcher. But unlike rescues outside where there are helicopters or large machines, here they relied purely on human strength. Every meter had to be hard-earned in the vertical shafts where Johan had to be lifted. The rescuers themselves used their own bodies as counterweights to control the weight of the stretcher. When one got tired, another would take his place. Because with just one wrong move, the stretcher could fall along with the patient and the rescuers. But the bigger problem was the narrow parts of the cave. There were areas where even the special stretcher couldn't fit. So in some instances, they had to make very careful decisions. Johan would be removed from the hard protection of the stretcher, wrapped in softer equipment, and then slowly passed through the rocks. In some passages, there were only a few centimeters between his body and the cave wall. The rescuers surrounded him, using their own hands and bodies to make sure his head wouldn't hit anything. They couldn't rush, but they also couldn't stop for too long. The longer they stayed inside, the more the whole team's strength was drained. The operation went on day and night. While one group moved along with Johan, the other group prepared the next part of the route. Some were waiting with food, others were preparing equipment, and there were doctors constantly monitoring his condition. But no matter how good their plan was, everyone inside the cave knew that it would only take one accident for everything to change. A falling rock, a snapped rope, or a single wrong move while carrying him could mean they might never get out. But slowly, meter by meter, hour by hour, Johan was getting closer to the surface from the darkest part of the mountain. He was getting closer again to the light that many thought he would never see. After several days of almost non-stop operations, Johan was slowly getting closer to the exit of Rescending Cave. But even though there were only a few meters left compared to how far he had already come, the rescuers still couldn't let their guard down. Because in a cave rescue, the last part can still be the most dangerous. People are already tired. Many members of the rescue team have had almost no sleep for several days. And every piece of equipment they've been using has also been in the harsh conditions of the cold and wet cave for several days, but no one wants to give up. Because after everything they've been through, there's only one thing on everyone's mind: to bring Johan out alive. On June 19, 2014, 11 days after the accident happened, the moment everyone had been waiting for finally arrived. Using a manual winch system, the stretcher was slowly pulled up toward the entrance of the cave. Outside, the rescuers, medical team, and helicopter that had been on standby for several days were waiting. And for the first time after almost 2 weeks underground, Johan saw the light again. The man whom many thought it was impossible to bring out from the depths of the mountain came back alive. He was immediately airlifted and brought to a trauma hospital in Murnau, Germany. He received further treatment, and despite the severity of the accident, he gradually recovered. After some time, Johan was able to do something that many did not expect. He returned to cave exploration. The Rescending Cave Rescue became one of the largest and most expensive and deepest cave rescue operations in history. It involved more than 700 people from different countries working together to save a person whom most of them did not even know personally. The cost of the operation was estimated to reach almost 1 million euros. But for the people involved in the rescue, saving a single life was more important. After the incident, the entrance to Rescending Cave was temporarily closed to prevent people without enough experience from entering. Now, a special permit and proper qualifications are required before entering this cave again, but the impact of the rescue did not end there. Because of the scale of the operation, more than a ton of equipment and trash was left inside the cave. This included food, medical supplies, batteries, and other items. It took until the year 2020 before everything was finally cleaned up and removed to protect the cave's natural ecosystem. What happened to Johan Westhauser is not just a story of survival, it's also proof of how far people are willing to go for the lives of others. Because under a dark and cold mountain where there is no sunlight, no signal, and almost no hope, more than 700 people proved that sometimes cooperation is enough to reach even places that seemed impossible to reach for the sake of one person's life. How about you? Would you also want to explore deep caves, or would you rather just stay at home and spend your time scrolling through social media? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, share it with others and subscribe. Also, watch the videos on the right so you can waste even more time.